My name is Margaret Jean Nelson. I was born in Fremantle on the 5th of October 1927. I have always been called Peg because Margarets in those days were called Peg. When I was born and they found out I was a girl, the doctor said, "You better call her Margaret. All the girls that I know with that colour hair are Margaret, and they're good women." So that was why I got the name of Margaret. I was born to Lucy Keane Tonkin and Edmund Haxton Foss Tonkin. My mother was a beautiful couture dressmaker before she was married, but of course after she was married she became just a wife and mother and a housekeeper. And my father was a truck driver. He had his own truck, and he had a business as a cartage contractor. They seemed to be very happy in the early days, and they seemed to work together very well. My mother was a beautiful woman, really, very amenable and very welcoming to people, and very kind to us. And my father, of course, was the head of the house and knew it, and he disciplined the boys, and Mum generally disciplined me. My brothers, there was Edmund Donald. He was the eldest, and he was a very pleasant man, always loved the sea, was very, very good at being a part of a group on a little Sharpie or anything that was sailing. He loved it, and of course joined the Navy in later life. Doug was an absolutely brilliant mechanical engineer. There was not a machine or engine that he couldn't manage. He was absolutely fantastic. But he was a lovely man. He was my kindred spirit, and he could fix any machine that anybody ever had, any car, any truck, anything. He could fix anything in the engineering line. And then there was Maury, who was the younger of the brothers anyway, and he was a very dapper little man. I think he was my father's favourite, and he got a lot of things that we didn't get. Didn't really have any leanings towards any trade, and eventually he became a salesman in a menswear to the shop, and of course he was always very well dressed, very dapper. Eventually he became a dancing instructor with the Wrightson's dancing studio. Maury was a very brilliant dancer. I never attended his classes, but I'm told he was a very good dancer, and he was a very good teacher of dancing. A very attractive man, very good looking, and very dapper, very, very well dressed, and kept himself very smartly dressed. We went every year to Point Perrin, and we camped at Point Perrin. And we had the best camp of all. But my uncles Edwin and Edward, they also went down there and had a camp too. So we had quite a little group of people who were relatives and friends, and their children. You know, I was only a young girl at that time, and I loved it. We had only one tent, and then we all slept on the back of the truck, my father's truck. We used to cart the stuff down there. And we put palliasses on the back of the truck and put a canvas over it. And then we had the other big tent where we could sit and eat our meals and things like that. But everybody slept on that. And that was good. We had two tents facing each other with a space in between. And she put a wall round that space and made a dining area of it. And we had hessian bags sewn together for the flooring. And we had hessian bags in between we all had camp stretchers, and we all had palliasses and pillows and sheets and blankets, which people normally do with camping. And then we had this big area in the middle with a big shade out the front so that we'd have chairs there. It was, every year we went down for about a month. It was absolutely wonderful. Get up in the morning and go straight into the beach. It was just... We did go down the beach quite frequently, and we learned to love the beach, a great deal. I'm very, very fond of the water. And they had a sort of sideshow alley down there when I was a child, and you could put a penny in and get your fortune, and there was a hit 'em and knock 'em and things like that. And it was always a nice day when we went down there. And they always had little shelter sheds that you could you could get there early to grab a shelter shed before anybody else did. And we'd always take a picnic lunch, and then we'd stay till the evening. Christmas was a big deal. Weeks before, the women would be making puddings and cakes, and we'd be fattening up a duck in the garden. I can remember having a pillow slip put on the end of my bed, and there was always an orange in the bottom, and we got one toy at Christmas, or one present at Christmas, and but it was always put in the pillow slip at the end of our bed, but always an orange went in first. I don't know why. And it was great. We had the usual Christmas dinner. We'd decorate the house. We kids would make paper chains out of streamers, and that would go on for some time. And that would be hanging all around the house without any real coordination of colours, no decor at all about it, just dreadful colours of streamers all linked together in paper chains. And often we'd make little things for one another, but it was always a big deal for my mother to have Christmas together. My mother's family originally came from Melbourne, but they settled in Western Australia when she was a young girl. And my father's family, of course, have been in Australia since 1830. And my grandparents, Sophia Jane Smith and George Smith, lived in Swan View, and it was 5 acres, and they had a horse and a cart, and there was a creek running through it, so there was plenty of things for us to do. Playing in the creek, the boys were always playing in the creek or going for walks in the bush, and my granny was a very strict lady, but very, very loving. And my grandfather was pretty gruff, didn't have much to say. He was a ranger for National Park, and he had a star, and he let us kids wear the star when we were up there and pretend we were rangers. It was my granny, Sophia Jane Smith, had a Scottish grandmother, and she loved the Scottish dancing and everything that was Scottish. So I did Highland dancing and entered into the competitions, and we all went to the meeting of the clans at Midland every year. And the Highland dancing was very important in our lives. So I had the kilt, of course, to dance in, and I did all the dancing that was part of the Highland dancing competitions. And we had a lovely time at some. And the dances that I used to go to when I was a very young teenager were run by the Caledonian Society. So we were always considered ourselves not British, but more Scottish. Australian first, but, the ethnic part of our lives was Scottish. My father's mother, Mrs. Elizabeth Tonkin, lived in the street with her daughter, Mrs. Conway. And, of course, we used to walk up to see her every now and again. And she'd walk down to see my mother and the rest of us nearly every night. She was always much sterner than my mother's mother, but she was reasonable. I could talk to her. I wish I'd talked to her more now and asked her more questions, but every time I got really going with the questions, she'd say, children should be seen and not heard, go outside and play. So I didn't get any further. She was a very gracious and very upright old lady. She carried herself well, and she walked every day, and she lived to be 100. Certainly she was very much in love with her husband, and never ever spoke of him, never used his first name, never even in speech to me or to anybody else. It was always, my sweetheart did this or my sweetheart did that. And when speaking to him personally, she'd always say Mr. Tonkin. I think it's a bit weird, but apparently that was a fashion at the time. She was a very canny businesswoman and owned a lot of land around the Albany area. She was a very astute businesswoman. For someone who had gone to Jarrahdale as a widow because her husband had died, and she took her family because there was a mill there, a timber mill, and the boys got work in the timber mill. My father was working in the mill at the age of 12, and eventually they had earned enough money to move up to Fremantle, and apparently the other members of the family, the twins, they had a business, a cartage business, running in and out of the markets in Fremantle when they were only 14 or something like that.